So welcome to the Inbound Lunch Bunch for July. It's hard to believe that we are almost at the end of, we're at the end of July in a couple of days. So we've gone through a number of topics since the beginning of the year. This month we're going to cover using images to attract customers. So hopefully if you've been a follower of the series, you can kind of see the tracks that we've led you on. We've kind of broken up components to talk about advertising and influence and bringing various elements up to light so that we can attract or engage new customers or new members. My name is Manisha Mangus. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Director of Consulting here at HighRoad. My background is in digital marketing. I have a number of years of experience in consulting with associations and helping them through some change management strategies, as well as figuring out, how to leverage social media, how they can leverage social media, creating demand and lead generation as well. So there are a number of ways to connect with all of us here at HighRoad. You can reach out to me at Twitter or find me on LinkedIn. We're always looking for feedback or additional topics or areas of interest that you'd like to further discuss with us. So certainly feel free to reach out to us and share your thoughts and your insights as well. So before we get started, just some housekeeping items. First of all, thanks for joining me during your lunch hour. We're brown bagging it, so everyone is currently on mute. So don't worry about accidentally opening up your lunchbox and making some noise. If you have followed us before, you likely know that we have a number of resources through our HighRoad U series, our program that's online. All of the previous inbound lunch sessions are available on demand. So you can always find them online if you want to go back and do a refresher, or if there was a topic previously that you were interested in. We also have a number of toolkits. So if you haven't signed up to receive our toolkit of the month, I strongly advise that you do so. Those toolkits, they're actually very useful. They're really kind of for the marketing practitioner, and they run the full range. Some of the toolkits are more for persona development to help you walk through how to develop personas and map your content. Others are more around software purchases and vendor evaluation, software evaluations, a matrix, or things to how to get started. We have one in particular that's very interesting. It's just how to prepare for marketing automation, how to do an evaluation, and really what things to look for. So those are very handy. So I encourage you to kind of find those toolkits as well, take a look through those. This is a technical item. It hasn't happened recently, but you never know. If I suddenly drop off the call, just hang tight, I'll dial back in. Zoom has a tendency to drop my calls occasionally. All right, so this is the group that talks about inbound, right? So we're going to do a little bit of a refresher. As month to month we talk about inbound marketing. So remember, inbound marketing, you may have heard the term, the term is being used kind of generically across the board by many other organizations. But inbound marketing and that methodology was coined by a company called HubSpot. So HubSpot is a software company that has a marketing automation platform called HubSpot, and they coined the term inbound marketing, and they came up with this methodology. So, in your careers, kind of as marketers, you probably recognize a lot of elements of, basic content marketing, what you call retargeting, just all those basic elements of content, push-pull content marketing embedded into this methodology. So it's a different way to break things up and then reassemble them together. But at a high level, right, here are pillars of the methodology, which are, the intention is to kind of say everything goes through a funnel, right? So you may have heard of the sales funnel. Marketing also has a funnel. And the intent is always to say use marketing automation to drive everything down to that funnel, right? So we start wide at the top, and then we get refined, towards the bottom of the funnel, right? So our core pillars are to attract, they are to connect, they are to engage, and then delight, right? So as you move through these pillars, right, you are dealing initially with strangers, right? In our world, kind of in the world of the association market, we're dealing with people who are prospects, right? So they are not members, but we feel that they probably should be, right? So we're dealing with these strangers who in turn interact with us kind of at the attract pillar level, right? In some form or fashion, they eventually become visitors. We're distinguishing visitors as kind of repeat behavior. They come back to us. They've found us somehow. They come back to us. They kind of like what we're putting out there. They continue to consume our information. At that point, we're connecting with them because whatever we're putting out there is resonating with them in some capacity. So eventually they turn into what we call leads, right? And then eventually, as we engage and delight them, they move from customers into advocates, right? So you can replace some of these terms with terms that you use within your own organization, right? The advocates are the equivalent of, your brand ambassadors, your brand evangelists, right? Strangers are those, quote unquote prospects that are sitting out there. Same thing with visitors, right? Your leads could be, you can qualify them as leads, or you can say here are potential prospects that are very warm and ready to convert. And customers in this case obviously are, customers if it's a revenue, if your campaign is driven around revenue, customers can be interchanged with members as well. It really kind of depends, right? So, the core pillars of this are kind of basic common sense in from the terms of marketing, but they're set out here to help you with a framework, right? So it's always constantly kind of going back against that to say, what are we trying to do at every step in the space? That's when you overlay technology on top of it. Right. So again, right, we start with the strategy, then we get into the MarTech stuff, which is to say, what are all our digital marketing properties out there and how can we use them? Right. So that's kind of the inbound marketing methodology refresher on this case. So our topic today is about using images to attract new customers. And in that case, typically what we're talking about is the first 2 or 3 pillars, right? So they attract and connect. For the most part, engage again, is to make sure that the message resonates, that we're really dealing with our personas who are sitting out there who are currently strangers or visitors or their leads, and we want to move them down that funnel and have them do stuff. So here's an image that you may have heard me talk about before. I think in the future we'll continue to discuss it, but I just want you to keep this at the back of your mind. Especially when we're talking about, marketing technology as a whole, right? So your whole picture, this is what we call a smart marketing technology stack, right? Your MarTech stack. What that is it's a representation of all your systems that are sitting out there doing stuff for you, right, from a marketing perspective. And some of them are containing or, they have data, right? They're storing data, and some of them are providing you data or applications. And by the way, if you have questions, let me get through the slide and then I'll stop and see what the question is. If you're able to chat it in the window, I'll stop and answer it. But just to kind of complete this, right? So this is just something to keep in mind, right? So you have all these systems sitting out there. This is a different representation of what you might normally see, right? Typically, when IT draws this diagram out, or most organizations drop it and draw it out, it's driven by here are all your applications, your big databases, and they're usually in the center, right? This is kind of saying that now, in this whole world of MarTech, right, your user is sitting in the middle, right, and your user is driving everything. You're collecting preferences from them through their EPC, right, their email preference center if you have one, or you're collecting their preferences based on interactions with them. You know who they are on social, they've done something, they've purchased something, right? They've interacted with you on newsletters. There's some capacity, right? So it's all being driven by that person in the middle. Then you have all your systems peripherally around it. So when we're talking about imagery, the use of imagery, I want you to think about all your different touch points that you have kind of sitting out there and how you can use them to attract those customers and kind of make sure that, they're doing stuff that are, or they're responding to the stuff that you want them to respond to. Let's see. Was there a question? Does anyone have a question to kind of put in the chat window? All right. If not, feel free to put it into the chat window, and then we'll kind of we'll move forward with that one. All right. So then, going back to inbound. All right. So inbound has very specific recommendations and best practices for email marketing in particular. All right, we'll start with email marketing because, again, from an association perspective, that is probably the most heavily used vehicle kind of in your MarTech repertoire, right? It is, people have mostly mastered it, to date. They are using it, and they're kind of sending stuff out there on a constant basis on a fairly high volume, right? So from the world of inbound marketing, what they're saying is that a couple of best practices just to kind of keep at the back of your mind. One, what they're saying is that, you should typically send emails from real people. And so what they've said, or what they've discovered, is that essentially putting your name, on behalf of the organization, rather than a generic email box like communications@association.org, actually helps with deliverability. It's a person. You're not, it's less of the impression that you're being spammed, or you're getting a blast email where the person doesn't know who you are, or the organization doesn't know who you are. Again, they move to personalize wherever you can. Right, so you can get as literal as that, where you're saying, your first name, we know the recent downloads, if you're doing some sort of communication outreach based on some action that they did with you, you could list out their conversion, which is the recent download or a recent, download of a white paper or an ebook. You could kind of list and throw in there that you know what organization they're from. You could be talking to your persona based on the smart content that you're putting in there. So essentially they're getting the email. If they're a persona marketing Mary, then they would get one set of text. If they were, Manager Bob, then they would get a different set of text based on who we know, based on who they are as we know them, right? So also what they're saying is use actionable language to be clear and compelling. So these are all kind of basic common sense stuff. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, right? But remember just to keep that at the back of your mind, right? As you're putting all these pieces together, those are kind of the core common pieces, right? So again, what HubSpot also says as part of inbound is to make sure that all your components have some sort of call to action. This is typically where we see most organizations kind of falter, and for a number of reasons, right? It's not intentional. In some cases, it may be a limitation on the template that they're using. It could be a limitation on programming, or it just could be a limitation on their content itself. Essentially that, you've got a letter from the board that has to go out. There is no call to action. It's simply an informal, it's designed to inform your membership base or your prospects or someone. There is nothing else to do, right? But, that's the whole point, right? There's something kind of on your team, on your side to think about, if I'm putting information out there, is there something that I can do to hook them to the next step, right? So thoughts on that are to modify the preview text, make sure all your hyperlink copy is in your email, you've got all text images, all those kind of things from a technical perspective that you want to kind of lock down. So then just a visual kind of representation of that. I've cropped out who this is for, so I don't want to point this out to anyone, but, just think about kind of the way you put your emails together in particular. We're focusing for a minute on emails, right? So this is this is part of an engagement series, right? So these are people who've already registered, right? But it could be for a different group, but specifically this was designed for people who have already registered, and we want to continue to kind of engage with them, right? So the conference is many, many, many weeks out. We want to send something on a regular basis that's automated to kind of tell them, build up interest and excitement and engagement leading up to the conference. So we've given them a rundown of here are all the different sessions that you could attend. You may want to think about, picking out from the master series which ones work for you. Right, so very straightforward, right? But think about this kind of format, and then think about what the best practices are, and then a modification of this, right? So again, same type of material, content really hasn't changed, but the way in which it's been presented visually has changed a little bit. And the big change is kind of the graphical button, the call to action, right? So again, think about it from this perspective, and a lot of this has to do with user design. Right, so it's all about the you. Here at HighRoad, we talk about the you. It's a user-centric model, right, where it's the user goes first. You got to think of it from that perspective. So even if you're talking about information, you want to design it from that perspective. So what HubSpot does is they give an example, right? So all the things they were talking about, personalization, put in your image as a call to action, have your actionable language, they've broken it up this way, right? So it's just something to think about, from that perspective. You can see the trend and the movement towards using imagery or some sort of graphical representation to break up the information that you have. As associations, that's a challenge because sometimes you have a lot of text-heavy content, heavy materials, right? There's no way to kind of spruce it up, right, if you will. So again, what we want to think about, what are ways then in which to demonstrate that this is something that's compelling and relevant so that in a couple of seconds that the user can kind of understand what you're trying to do. All right, so this month we're talking about imagery, and we all know this, right? And a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? If you are lucky enough to kind of be able to kind of have the imagery accessible, right? If it communicates your message, your overall kind of compelling, your tagline, your message, that's really great. And this is one of the reasons why we're starting to see in the field and in the market, infographics are very popular for this reason. All right, so there's a lot of stuff going on that make infographics very interesting and consumable. All right, so I have a question that asks, where should you add the member's name? In the subject line, the preview line, or the headline? That's an excellent question. All right, so you want to choose, right, the one that has the most impact, right? So the preview line is something that you really can't control from an application perspective. The preview line displays and renders a little bit differently, whether I'm looking at it on my mobile phone through Yahoo Mail, or if I'm on my desktop looking through it through Outlook 2016 versus 2013 versus 2010, right? So the preview line is probably not the place to do it. The subject line is a good place to do it if it is truly something that is a message specific to that user, right? If you want to capture their attention, you could definitely use it in the subject line. The headline also is an option, right? So I think it really depends on the content that you have. If, to be honest, the rest of your content doesn't have a degree of personalization to it other than the first name, you probably want to leave it inside of the headline and not in the subject. Right? The subject is truly kind of you're saying, Manisha, stop what you're doing and look at my email, right? And I'm going to be a little annoyed if I stop what I'm doing and I look at the email and you sent me a generic email that you sent to everybody else, right? So again, think about it from a user perspective, user behavior mindset. But that was an excellent question. So what's interesting is that, I think everybody accepts that imagery is really important. I think we've fought and won that battle, from a web design perspective, right? So we know that imagery evokes emotion, right? And emotions, they drive those basic motivations that energize behavior, right? And emotions, that's what's effective in influencing purchasing behavior, right? We know that, right? So you can see that demonstrated today when whatever sites that you're on, right, especially the ones that want you to take action or do something, the compelling use of imagery is a very good way to get somebody to do something. So I don't think it's a question of, we shouldn't use images, right? It's just a question now of where do you use them, right? So I think what we want to go back to, and a little bit of this goes back to visual design, for that user-centric, that user experience, what that looks like. You always want to go back to what's visually more effective, right? And again, it depends on your content. So this is not to say go back and drop everything and, replace everything with graphics, because again, right, from a deliverability standpoint, you can't put an email, or you shouldn't put an email that has more graphics in it than text, right? If your email application is good, it will kind of flag it for you and tell you, like, you have a very high ratio of imagery or graphics to text. You may want to adjust it because you have spam filters that might, block you and filter you out from the inbox, right? So there's a balance, right? But you always want to think about it, a text with a hyperlink, is that more visually effective, right? Does it grab my attention and make sense? Do you want to go with a graphical button? Or, which is what the movement we're seeing too, is do you want to create your call to action as an image, right? Also known as a banner ad. And that's the big thing, right? So that's the image, that's the shift that we're seeing is, you've got your text hyperlinks, you've got your buttons. I think everybody is very comfortable and familiar with putting buttons in email. But this new kind of shift to say, let's use a banner ad, right? And let's move towards that model. So as I said, the big challenge within the association is it's not that they don't understand that images, are a powerful way in which to capture attention and to attract those new customers or those customers. I think it's really just the application of it on different digital channels, right? So we know that websites themselves, they've mastered that, and that's what we've been trained to do. Websites use imagery to break up the information, to make it chunkable, to make it consumable, so that you have something to resonate that, resonates with you, and you come back to it on a regular basis. So that really works well, and we've seen that executed very well in the market, right? But for the other properties, and we can reference inbound properties because we are doing the inbound lunch bunch, the other properties out there, they kind of back off a little bit, right? So we've got landing pages and websites, those seem to be covered, right? But then what about blogs? If you've got a blog sitting out there, are you effectively using imagery in a way to attract people, right? What about email, and what about social? So those are some of the questions. Those are some of the areas where I think associations could focus a little bit more. So IMC, that's an excellent question. Sorry, that's my shorthand. So IMC is short for Integrated Marketing Campaign. And I'll talk a little bit about it later as well. But IMC, the Integrated Marketing Campaigns are essentially saying, if you have a campaign is typically not just an email. You want to think about it like cross-promotion. So you may have heard those terms before, cross-promotion, where we've got, we've got a page on our website that talks about our new program, right? So if we have, let's use a webinar as an example. We have a new webinar that's added to our series, to our program. We've put the basic information onto the web page itself. Now we have links pushing out, to add to your cart if it's something tied to e-commerce. And then we have to sit there and think about how we're going to drive people to this page. Right, so this page is sitting there now. It's got content in it. Eventually it'll be indexed by Google, right? So we've got SEO working kind of behind the scenes to make sure people land on the page should they search for it in Google or Bing or any other application, search engine application out there, right? But what else can you do to drive people? So typically, the next thing that leads to mind probably is social. So let's go ahead and promote it. Let's promote it by putting a link out there and tweeting it, or putting it on our LinkedIn group page or our home page, or let's put it on Facebook. All right, and then the next step is to say, okay, so we've got social media pushing it and promoting it. Usually social media, you're kind of going to have a schedule to kind of put that out and push that message out. Then you probably want to think about banner ads and other applications, right? So you've got a banner ad or some sort of graphic on your employee signature, right, on your staff email signature, and then you're thinking about email to push the message through, right? So IMC just really kind of makes sure that you're thinking about all the elements of your campaign and not focusing on just the one piece, which is typically email. So another question, it's also a very good question, right? So it's saying, regarding images and emails, what about the fact there are a lot of email systems like Outlook, they don't automatically open images and emails? Does it dilute the effect if images are in the email? That's an excellent question. And yes, that is true, right? So Outlook in particular is notorious for blocking all your images. So, you have to, one, strike a balance, right? And then, kind of what we're saying here is don't put all your apples in one basket, right? And so email is not the source central where you should apply all of this and leave all the other properties out, right? So there has to be a balance. And what we've done, and you may see this kind of executed in some of the emails that you receive from us, what we do is we put text underneath the image, right, kind of representing what the action of the button is as well. So again, you can go through a number of steps to kind of figure out kind of how your content is being consumed. There are a number of applications that are sitting out there that allow you to assess and evaluate what applications are mostly, what devices, as well as what applications, desktop or mobile or webmail, are being used to consume your information via email. So that is an excellent point, and it's very true. We don't recommend that you use imagery across the board in the entire email, which is why the email itself has to be broken up, to have a combination where it's text links as well as. And I guess the idea is to say imagery should be used to supplement the same call to action that you might have in text as well, right? Because again, as human beings, we're still very visual in nature, and we want to be able to kind of provide our message so that we can get them to click on the button, click on the link, or do something before, their attention span drops and they move to something else. All right. So when we say banner ad, it has a specific connotation to it. Maybe this is one of the things that, as part of inbound, we want to see that change a little bit too. And there is a slide, it'll be a gradual shift, right? But, banner ad is technically an image, right? It's how you promote it. Your banner ad is sitting out there. It could be words. Generally, it's an image that's sitting out there on some other digital property. And the intent is to capture your attention and push you somewhere. Right, so again, when we're saying use images to attract customers, we are saying, it's the equivalent of having a banner ad. So it's your call to action could be a banner ad, right? And so these are banner ads that have been embedded in a combination or in a multitude of areas, right? So it's not just email, but we have used them via an email. We also see them used on landing pages of call to actions, sliders, or pop-outs that, if you're browsing on your content and you have an application running behind the scenes, essentially tracking your behavior, right? After you've visited 3 articles, as you click to link, click on the window to close it, you may get a pop-up to say, before you leave, sign up, or you might be interested in this free white paper or something like that, right? But these are all banner ads. These are all call to actions. These are all images, right? So they're treated as such. So again, we use them sparingly. We use them, I guess sparingly is not the right word. We use them in context of the user journey. All right, so all the things we always talk about, we kind of say, know your personas, know what your user journey is, know the critical path to get to something. This is where all of this kind of comes together and fits together. So as a marketer, you're sitting there and you inherently know all of this, right? It's all tapped and it's all locked in your brain, right? So, the intent is to kind of say, okay, so as I'm reading it, I know this person falls into persona X, right? This is Marketing Mary, and Marketing Mary needs to know. She wants to know how we've done so far to date, right? And she wants to know what else you might have going on for her. She doesn't probably have time to read it. She'll eventually read it, but if there's some way we can grab her attention and demonstrate to her that, hey, by the way, you've saved $200 so far to date, right? I see that typo now, sorry. But, if you see, a visual to kind of say, hey, Mary, we know that, thanks for purchasing the season pass, right? Because we know you've saved this much money so far. Make sure you stay connected to us because this is part of your membership. It's the imagery, and, images, it could be anything. It could be a combination of text or something, but that's what hooks you in, right? So it's a smart balance of using the content you have in supplement with these images. And, the real point is kind of where the images are, right? So it's not to say that images should only be used in email. We know they're used very well inside of websites. What we want to do is kind of have that pervasive, right? Not just websites, not just email, but email, websites, your blog if you have one, landing pages if you have them, right? Social, right? So again, there are many studies that say, when you put a post on social media, typically when you add an image, it performs better. And this is across the board. This is in Twitter as well as in LinkedIn as well as in Facebook, right? So it's leveraging in all those pieces that you already know in an effort to bring it all together, right? So you can amplify your reach and amplify your voice. So I thought, since this is inbound, I thought we would do a little bit of a show and tell, right? So I have an example to kind of walk you guys through to talk about specifically what one organization is currently working on today. So this is, GPMI is they are the offshoot of the American Payroll Association. So there's a specific program called the Global Payroll Management Institute, and the aim of that program is to generate discussion and engagement and visibility of global payroll issues across the world. So the GPMI, the Institute, comes together at the annual conference once a year, and they host a number of panels, a number of forums and networking sessions. We created a blog inside of using HubSpot as a platform. We created a blog essentially for GPMI to kind of promote their messaging in real time at the conference, right? So there was a new panelist forum. There was a forum that was put together. A set of panelists was put together, but the deadline had passed for this promotion kind of in the brochure, in the print. So we went digital, right? We said, let's put it out there. This way, all these panelists, they come from various organizations. If we give them kind of this digital area in which to work within, they in turn can promote on their end and push people to this as well. Right, so the intent is to kind of say, we have expertise. We have panelists sitting on our panels. We have a wide, varied expertise, and we have a number of pieces of information that will be useful to you. All right, so this is kind of the starting point here of this blog, right? So again, you can kind of, let me switch back here. So again, we use the call to action kind of as the primary image, right, to promote the session, with the plan kind of in the future to say that there could be additional banner ads and there would be other activity on this page kind of as we started to kind of fully, embrace the blog after the event. Right, so again, this is going back to a call to action is not necessarily a button, and this is a transition, right, certainly from traditional marketing where you think, the call to action is always going to be a button. And typically it's represented as a button, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a graphical button, right? It could be an image, or what we call a banner ad. It could be a slide out image that kind of scrolls across the screen, has your text or something in there and then it kind of goes away, right? So your content could be pull quotes, right? So again, don't feel limited that, the image itself, right? Whatever this call to action is has to be, a really nice graphic picture, right? And, it's a challenge with associations because again, depending on the type of organization you are, you may not have really nice pictures of, you have a picture of a book cover. That's really kind of hard to spruce up. it is a book, right? Or it's an ebook, right? So, generally the question is like, well, what are we going to put on this call to action? Like, what is it, right? So again, go back to content, right? You specialize in content. Pull quotes are very popular. Again, think of it from an infographic perspective. You put on your infographic hat and think about, statistics perform very well, percentages perform very well visually, right? So pull quotes, again, very good, right? Testimonials, those also perform very well, come from an image standpoint. So you do have the ability to tap into content that you can visually translate as an image, right? So again, the other thing that you can do on a blog or on a web page or on an email is personalize, right? So it's a combination of showing the right image, right, with knowing who's looking at my content or my image, where are they coming from and where have you been in the past? Those are kind of different conversion factors, but all of that has to do with personalization. So I wanted to show you what you can do. This is using HubSpot, but again, any other marketing platform, the technology is kind of irrelevant. We can figure out different technology platforms can do similar things for you, right? But really the whole point is in here, HubSpot's calling a call to action, whatever you want to make it, right? So you can see here, so for the vendor relations team at the American Payroll Association, for their blog, they have 2 calls to action for the same campaign. One is a button, so it says download now, and the other one is an actual visual image that says get the answers for your tough payroll questions with a little, real book cover, right? So what we've done is we've essentially said we need to make these calls to action smart. If someone is looking at our email or our landing page or our blog page on a mobile device, this image takes a lot of room. And, on a phone, you won't be able to really see the title very well, right? So let's just change it to a download now button. And if you're not on a mobile device, meaning all other instances, which is the default instance, let's show them the image that we created, our banner ad image, right? So you can set rules around this, which are really interesting now because it opens up the power of what you can do, from an attraction standpoint. So HubSpot, again, is saying that, you can create your call to action based on who you are or where you're coming from or what device you're using, right? So again, all of this goes back to user experience. You're designing something to a degree, right? So what I like particularly about this is that while we've created inside of HubSpot and it's designed to kind of plug in, you can plug it into blog, landing pages, or email, they've also got embed code, right? What's powerful about this is that you can now take this embed code and put it on your website. So think about, the possibilities that you can do on your website now, right? So you've got a piece of code, right, and that's got these embeddable calls to action. They're sitting on your website, and should someone come through and look at your property or your page, your website page, whatever it might be in your CMS or a standalone landing page, right? If they're looking at it on their phone, they're going to see the button. If they're looking at it on a desktop, they'll go ahead and they'll see the image, right? So it's really interesting how you can kind of tie the pieces together. What I really like about this is that you have a lot of options in which to create these calls to action. So these calls to action could be, again, they could be the button that gets embedded in the form page or it gets embedded in the email. If you're on a website, you could do the slider where it slides out, right? So, but what's interesting about this now is that GPMI, they've got a blog that's fully functional, right? And now they're getting requests. They're getting requests from the marketing team to say, hey, can you put in your blog a promotion for a webinar that's designed specifically for people in Australia? Now, they know the statistics on the blog right now are primarily U.S. driven, right? 80% of the traffic is coming to this page from the U.S. 20% is across the board from other countries, right? So now the content team is in a little bit of a dilemma, right? So how obvious do they make the post on the blog that's really supposed to be content driven that this is an advertisement for something that is, part of our program? The marketing is doing a heavy push. They insist that we've got to have it. We don't want to throw in a banner ad, but we need a blog post, right? Because we feel a blog post has that visibility. So now the PR team's kind of in a little bit of a bind. Like, what do we do? What's the right way to do it? How are we going to phrase it? Things like that, right? This is where they can tap into something like this. So now what they're in a position to do is say, let's go ahead and present a banner ad, right? Your pop-up banner ad or your slider call to action, whatever it is, but let's go ahead and base its display based on the country that the user is coming from. So it's very similar to kind of what we just saw on the previous screen where they've got device type. You can do it by country, right? Which means that if the system is able to detect your IP address is coming from the country of Australia, it will display a pop-up image, right? Your call to action, it will display that for those users coming from there. And then you're able to set a rule that says if you're not from Australia, don't display anything, right? So you're now talking about layers of imagery on top that's based on a specific audience, which is rather powerful. What you can also do is you can do referral sources as well. So you can create rules around a referral source. And this is what this kind of right hand of the screen is kind of showing you. You can do it based on a number of things, right? So the referral source, is it Google? Is it like an organic search where somebody's looking or typed in for something? Or is it from direct traffic? So particularly useful for those who are promoting exhibitor programs, right? So exhibitors kind of fall outside of the normal member, non-member categories, right? You want exhibitors, but perhaps your page is for people who are from Xerox, right? So again, the vendor relations team at American Payroll Association, they put out landing pages with offers sponsored by Xerox. So therefore, what they want to do is they want to show a message specifically to the people who are coming from the domain Xerox.com and show them a specific message or a specific pop-up or a specific banner ad, right? So again, you can get very sophisticated in your rule sets that you create here. So hopefully that's a little inspiring. So again, the whole point is to kind of demonstrate, ways in which to kind of work around or work with call to action using those images, right? So again, a call to action is traditionally used to be a button. It doesn't have to be now. You can even embed an image inside of an email. As we said, make sure it's balanced, right? So it's not the entire email, but the whole point is that you can get smart about using your content in a way that makes sense based on who you're talking to. All right, so we want to treat images like banner ads to promote your programs. Definitely use your images as part of your integrated marketing campaign. And, consider usage on multiple channels, right? So email, landing pages, blog, as well as social, right? So I think website is a given. I think these are all the other pieces where you want to cross-connect and cross-promote as much as possible. And leveraging personalization, that's, that could be very simple to very sophisticated. Again, it depends on the level of data you have at your disposal initially, what you're trying to do, and kind of what you know about your users as you go out through that journey. All right. That's all actually I have for today. I'm going to leave the line open so you can post more questions. Taking a different tack for this lunchdown. Usually I do a lot of the talking and it's all theoretical. I thought we would change things up a little bit and, do a little bit of show and tell. If there are other scenarios that you'd like to talk about or you'd like to see if we've possibly done those, I'm happy to show those to you. And for the person who asked the question, here's my information that you were asking for. So like I said, I will leave the lines open for a little bit so you can post your questions and I can answer them. If you don't have any questions, thank you very much. We'll be sending out the deck immediately afterwards. And again, as I said, if you have any other insights or topics or things that you'd like us to talk about, certainly feel free to reach out to us. And yes, all of you will be getting this presentation at the end of this call. So be on the lookout in your email box. Okay. So I will definitely feed that back. So compelling subject lines. That's always a tricky one. Yeah. All right. So compelling subject lines for email. That's always a tricky one, right? So you've got the basics of, don't put words such as sale or, things like that where you don't want the spam filters to catch up, right? So typically there are some words, the kind of red signs that say avoid using this. Compelling subject lines are hard, right? Again, a lot of it has to do with knowing your personas and knowing who you're sending to. And in some cases, knowing what you want them to do, right? So it becomes particularly important when you've got users on mobile devices. who are, quickly scrolling through if they're on webmail or some other application where they don't see your content right away. They just see who it's from and then, possibly a little bit of your preview text as well as your subject line. This is a case where your preview text actually helps you as well. Because that preview text, is like the preview text is not something you see when you open up the full email, right? So it's a way for you to kind of provide a little bit extra information, right, that you may not necessarily have to specifically call out, right? So examples of this is that we've seen and that we've implemented for clients in the past have been around event marketing, right? Specifically that an early bird registration is coming up, deadline is coming up, housing deadlines are about to expire, things like that. So, subject lines are tough, and I definitely think we have some resources that we can tap into. So I will go back and look through those as well so we can craft something together. But, subject lines, you've got to strike a balance of how much you're putting in there and how wordy, right? You got to be snappy, catchy, yet concise and to the point. So that's where preview text lines probably they help supplement kind of what you're talking about as well. But that is an excellent question, and we'll likely put together a presentation around that as well. All right. All right. I don't see any other questions, so again, feel free to drop off. I will stay on the line for about a couple of other more minutes if anybody has any questions. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the week. Suzanne, you have a good number of questions this week. Site retargeting. So site retargeting, for those of you who don't know, so site retargeting is like, so theoretically, if 100 people come to your website, the primary statistic is that 2 of them will convert. And convert means they'll do what you want them to do. 98 of them will leave, right? Once those 98 leave, site retargeting is a way in which to follow through those, not quite stalk, but follow those 98 people and present your content through a display ad network so that you remain top of mind. So it is from a brand impression standpoint where you essentially have an arrangement with another organization, another display ad. So AdRoll is one, Google retargeting does it, Google AdWords. There are a number of other networks out there. What those networks do is they kind of reach out to different websites and they arrange for a display of ads. So you may notice that, in your own browsing experience, you're on CNN or on Fox News or wherever you're browsing through, and all of a sudden kind of in a designated space where there's typically a display ad, a paid display ad, the ad suddenly is something you recognize, right? It's HighRoad Solutions. Download our marketing automation ebook, right? Or it's, an organization such as Apex promoting their annual show coming up in DC, right? So it's something that resonates with you because it becomes very specific. So essentially, the intent is to say, the person comes to my site, I'm one of the 98, let's say I'm one of the 98 that leave, right? The intent is to say I'm going to put something in front of you so that I remind you. And my image, my ad has to be compelling. It's my banner ad that has to be compelling enough for me to click on it. The theory is that, once I click on that, I'll be taken back to your site where I continue to get exposed to something clearly that resonated with me through that banner ad, and then I complete my action. So it's not, site retargeting is not to create leads per se. It doesn't generate new leads. What it does is it closes the conversion, right? So again, it's not dealing with the, how do I get 100 people to my site, 100 new people to my site. It's more about how do I get those remaining 98, what percentage of them can I get back to my website so that they convert, so that they do what I wanted them to do. And so a lot of that has to do with, again, the sophistication of what you put in that image. That's where your banner ads and your imagery really kind of comes into play. So new leads to your site, again, it depends a little bit about, so the question was, what are the suggestions on getting new leads to a site, to their website? That's a tough question. It's a mix, essentially. That's essentially the secret sauce that we often formulate per client. It's the combination of knowing who your personas are, right, and what are the pain points they're looking for. So that's tapping into some of the inbound methodology that we always practice here. On top of that, it's leveraging all those digital marketing tools that are sitting out there. So really depending on kind of what your target market is, who your personas are and where they live, right, if they are all on LinkedIn, right, which we constantly talk about here on Inbound Lunch Bunch. If they're all on LinkedIn, then social digital advertising is a way to amplify your voice to a pool of people that may not necessarily know about you or be members, but they are like-minded in the sense that they have the educational, professional background that you're probably looking for, right? So paid advertising balanced with, organic, non-paid traditional routes is the right combination probably. We don't see a lot of associations do that too much yet. Some associations are a little bit further advanced do that, and then they do site retargeting combined with paid digital advertising. So it's a combination, and you have to figure out kind of what that percentage is, right? So it's not all or nothing, it's not 50-50, it's a balance, but it also requires constant tweaking. Right, so again, for site retargeting, your image and kind of your banner ad that you put out there is, it's got to be very clear. It's got to be very concise. Obviously you can't put too much content on there because it's an image, right? So it really does put you on the spot to be very, clear in what you want them to do. You want them to click here so they get to your web page, and that's where you have more information, right? What they also say is probably the longevity of that particular site retargeting ad is about 4 weeks at the most, which means you are constantly innovating, right? So it's almost like you have different iterations of an ad ready to go to replace, right? So it's always a constant test the waters, see how it works, test the waters, see how it works. And that's very much the same way with digital advertising as well. So what generates leads, again, it's hard to say. It depends on the client. It depends on your target market and who your personas are and who we're talking to. But, we want to cover both bases. We've got the unpaid, which is search engine optimization, which is, banner ads in the typical places. You've got landing pages for your offers. You've got all those digital markers out there, and, you've tied them through your integrated marketing campaign. And then on the other side, you've got the paid pieces, right? So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be paid advertising for all your campaigns, but perhaps one where, display of this is worth it to drive people, right? So it's really kind of finding, it goes back to all your personas and finding where your people are, right? So if all your fish are on Twitter but not in Facebook, then you obviously want to focus more on Twitter than you would on Facebook. Same thing with LinkedIn, right? So those are kind of the big three, but again, we found traffic on Pinterest to be interesting as well. Pinterest is a source, again, it comes into play when we're talking about imagery, but infographics, people are always pinning stuff to infographics on Pinterest, so you can kind of cultivate a list of people who are kind of trolling through your Pinterest site to see who might be interested in that. So it's a combination, right? And this is where we kind of go back to the integrated marketing campaigns, because it's all those cross points, right? So it's to say, if you're looking for newsletter subscribers, make sure your newsletter subscriber widget is on your website as well as on social media. If you're looking for blog subscribers, make sure that you have a banner ad as part of your email that goes out to your membership, to make sure that you can promote it to them, and make sure you've got your blog subscriber or some sort of pop-up or something on your regular website to take them back to look at the blog or at least subscribe straight from your website. Right, so it's all those cross-connector points that help in exposing all of your programs that you have available to you. All right, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. This was an interesting topic for me to get to show you some of the work that we're doing with the American Payroll Association. We have a number of other clients that we're doing stuff for. So again, kind of stay tuned. And as I said, you'll be receiving the deck shortly. And if you have any questions, certainly feel free to reach out to any of us here at HighRoad. And we look forward to talking to you next month. So thanks very much, everyone.